Well, we want to welcome everybody to week 1 of the Arise Lifegroup breakout. And so we're welcoming you guys. Thank you so much for being here and being a part of this. And also you guys who are watching online, we're so glad that you are taking this journey with us. I'm excited, more excited than I've ever been really, about where our church is and what God's calling us to do and where we're going. And to me, it seems like such a huge step. It seems such a big moment, and yet knowing that God is in us and in this moment, and He is driving it, and just feeling the life and the breath of His Spirit. And I'm excited about this series. We're in week 1 of this series, Arise, and I just think that's what God's calling our church to do. And this really isn't about a building. Now, our church needs a building. We're out of space. We know that. It's just not about a building. This is more about expanding a reach. This is more about reaching more people. This is more about what God's calling individuals to do. And as individuals arise, then the church arises. The church steps forward, but it only moves forward when individuals move forward. And so this is that moment, not just for our church to build a building. This is that moment for our people to really step further into what God's called them to do. And so that's really what we're talking about, and that's really what this series is about. And so in week 1, we're talking about defining moments. And when we're talking about defining moments, here's what defining moments do. They do some things, but just simply put, they reveal and they define and they compel and they impact. I mean, defining moments are those moments where I think God reveals something to us, and sometimes that's about us, sometimes that's about Him. I think they call us to step out in a new way. And I think more than anything, they determine the direction that we're going to go. And so that's what we're talking about. And this series is kind of about the study of the life of Abraham. And in Genesis chapter 12, we see God coming to Abraham. Now, we first see Abraham and Sarah at the end of Genesis chapter 11, but we don't learn a lot about them other than we find out who Abraham's dad is, and they're living in Haran. But Genesis chapter 12, that's one chapter that most believers are familiar with, because that's where God appears to Abraham, and He talks to Abraham, and He says, Abraham, it's time for you to move forward. It's time for you to arise. It's time that we leave where we're at in Haran, and we're going to go to this land in Canaan that I'm going to show you. And so I'm going to need you to trust me. I mean, this is kind of a crazy moment, because it's kind of like sell the house, right? Leave the family, leave the people, right? And load up everything you have in the station wagon. And really, in a way, God says, just go that way. You know, it's not like, just hit I-20 and just go that way, and I'll let you know whenever you get there. And I think that's one of the things we admire about Abraham, is this incredible faith. And so this is about defining moments. And when we're talking about defining moments, number 1, you can write these down if you want, and you can follow along at home. You have space for notes there. But you can write down, number 1, that defining moments reveal. Defining moments reveal. What I love about Genesis 12 is there's a lot of revelation that's going on, because in Genesis 12, first of all, God is revealing to Abraham, and He's revealing, number 1, what Abraham is called to do. Because He's taken Abraham, who we know Abraham and Sarah at this point are barren, and all of a sudden God is speaking to them, and He's revealing what Abraham's destiny is. I'm going to make you the father of a nation. Like, this is what I'm calling you to be. And so there's that revelation of Abraham's calling, and then within that, there's the revelation of God's mission in the earth. In other words, Abraham, I'm calling you to move forward because I want a nation. And so it's kind of this interesting thing that in one conversation, Abraham learns, number 1, what I'm called to do, and number 2, what God's trying to do. And I think when we're talking about Arise, it's kind of those two components. We kind of see what God's wanting to do. We see this church that God's wanting to build. We see this movement of people that God wants to have. That's His mission, but then we see our part in that. Like, what is our calling in that? What is God asking us to do? And so defining moments reveal. Here's the second thing you could write down, is that defining moments define. Defining moments define. And let me say this about reveal, because I want to make sure I put this in there. Because what I love in this is Abraham didn't earn this calling. and he didn't earn this encounter with God. And I think anytime we're talking about God, grace has to be a part of that conversation. That it was really by God's grace. We didn't see that Abraham had great church attendance or that he prayed every day. We don't see that he offered great sacrifices. I mean, we don't even have ceremonial law yet. But by God's grace, he reveals. And then by God's grace, he defines. By God's grace, he defines. He reveals, he defines. And what does he define? Well, the first thing he did is he defined who Abraham was. And what I like about this, if you think about this, he defined who he thought Abraham was. Because a lot of times there's a discrepancy between who we think we are and who God thinks we are. Right? I mean, we see this with Gideon. Like Gideon's kind of hiding from the enemy, and God shows up and says, no, you're like a great warrior. And Gideon's like, I thought I was here by myself. Like, who are you talking to? Who are you talking to? Like, I don't think you know me. Like, obviously we haven't met God. And so I think this is incredible because Abraham probably wasn't sitting there thinking, like if you'd ask Abraham in Genesis chapter 11, hey, what do you think you're going to do with the rest of your life? Who do you think you are? That kind of thing. I don't think Abraham would be sitting here thinking, I think I'm like the father of the nation of God. And I think God's going to use me to start a nation and a movement of people that through that people and through that nation and through that movement, the whole world's going to be blessed because of me. I don't think Abraham was thinking that. I don't think that was even on the map. You know what I'm saying? But I think what Abraham would have said is like, well, I'm trying to be a good husband. I'm trying to run my business, whatever that is. He wouldn't have come. And so in this moment, there's this definition brought to Abraham, not of who he thinks he is, but who God thinks he is. I think that's so critical about defining moments when all of a sudden we start to see, wow, if God's calling me to do this, who does he say that I am? I know who I say he is, but who does he say that I am? And so I think it defines that. And then even more than that, it defines who God is. So it defines who God thinks we are, and it defines who God is. I mean, if you look at this, I think the three characteristics that you have to maintain, the three characteristics of God to me that are crucial if I'm going to believe and trust in him, is that God is powerful, God is good, and God is near. And really, in this conversation, that's what you see. God says, I will make. In other words, I'm powerful enough to do this. It didn't say like, Abraham, I need you to do this, that, or the other. No. You just believe me, and I will make you a great nation. In other words, I have the capacity and the ability to do that. I will make you. So God is powerful. Then the next thing he says, and I'm going to bless you and multiply. God is he is good, right? He's benevolent. And so God is revealing he is powerful and he is good. And then to me, the third thing is God is revealing he's near. Like I'm right here. I'm talking to you. I came to see you. And so God is powerful. I can make this happen. God is good. I just came to bless you. And God is near. We're having this conversation. And so I think when we're talking about defining moments, we're talking about this idea that number one, they reveal to us. But number two, they define some things to us. And so this is where we're going to pause. And so if you're watching at home, we're going to pause right here. And you and your group, you're going to have some discussion. And you're going to discuss, I want you to discuss a couple of things. I want you to discuss, number one, I want you in your group maybe to share a defining moment. In other words, share a time that God asked you to do something, that God called you to do something. And then number two, I want you to share what you learned. Maybe what you learned about you or what you learned about God when God spoke to you and God called you to do something. So we're going to take just a moment in our groups. We're going to discuss those things, and then I'll be back to finish up week number one. Hey, welcome back. Welcome back. Hope you guys had some great discussion around those 2 points. We've been talking about defining moments. We've been talking about the fact that defining moments defining moments reveal. And there's two more, to me, characteristics of a defining moment that I want to continue our discussion with. Number three is defining moments compel. Defining moments compel. In other words, they call us to action. Right? It is impossible to step into your calling without stepping out of your comfort. And so defining moments actually call us out of what's comfortable into what we're called to do. I remember when I was 19 years old, And I remember having this defining moment with God where, for me, I grew up in a pastor's home. It's not the easiest place to grow up, although it definitely has some benefits. I thank God for my heritage and the faith that I had and how much Bible I learned. But there was nothing about me really that wanted to be a pastor. I was thinking something in the medical field, and even when I started college, that was kind of the track that I was on. And I had this defining moment where God just wouldn't leave me alone, right? From about the time I was around 19, it was just I had to wrestle with God. And I started looking at, here's one of the things we do if we're really honest. You start trying to negotiate, like how much can I surrender and still do what I want to do? Have you guys ever noticed that? And so I was kind of having those discussions with God, like, well, God, it's not that I don't want to serve you. It's not that I don't want to be a part of the church. It's not, but I really don't know, but I feel like you're maybe wanting me to go this way and I don't want to go that way. And I remember coming to this moment where it was just this call of action. In fact, when I was between 19 and 20 years old, about that time, is when really I surrendered to planning Pathway Church. Like that's when it was really birthed in my heart. That was that defining moment that compelled me to action, kind of changed everything about my degree plan, everything about the steps and the things that I was doing, because I just came to this moment, okay, God, this is what I'm going to do. And at that moment, that was really when God spoke to me. And I said, you know what? I think I am called to pastor a church. And back then it was to start a church. We didn't plant. Nowadays we plant churches, but to start a church, it was this defining moment. But to do that, I had to step out of my comfort in order to step toward my calling. That's what we see with Abraham. I mean, obviously he's got a nice house, right? Probably at least 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. A nice home like this. We want to say thank you to Mark and Elena for letting us use their home. But had a nice, beautiful home like this, probably a nice front yard, right? Nice backyard. Probably had 2-car garage, everything that he'd ever dreamed. The American dream, or maybe the Hebrew dream. I don't know. They weren't really Hebrews at the time. But anyways, he had a dream. That was the point. He was probably living his dream, and it was comfortable. And then God says, I want you to leave your home and your family and your stuff. And I want you to go. And all of a sudden, Abraham is like, if I'm going to move toward my calling, I have to move away from what's comfortable. To me, really, that's what Arise is about. It's why we're even doing it as a church. Yeah, we need a facility. That's secondary. What it's really about is saying, hey, as a group of people, will we commit to move out of our comfort toward our calling? I remember having a discussion one time with a guy that was on our staff. And we were having this interesting discussion, and I was talking about what I felt like God was calling us to do, and there was a little bit of a pushback, like, gosh, that's going to be a lot. And I'm like, oh, well, yeah, it is. And I told him this, and I never forget this. When we talk about Arise, and as a church, we talk about taking over the world. There are 2 concepts that are always mutually exclusive: conquest and comfort. You cannot have them both. You can choose comfort, but when you choose comfort, you are not choosing conquest. And when you choose conquest, you are not choosing comfort. And as a people, as a church, if we're called to step into our calling to, as we say, take over the world, then we're choosing conquest, which means we're choosing to never again be comfortable. Those are mutually exclusive terms. And I can tell you for really when God spoke to us to start the church in September the 22nd, 2008, from that point until now, I've never been comfortable. And the moment I think I'm comfortable, God reveals yet something else we're supposed to be doing it. You just can't have conquest and comfort. And so to step into your calling, you have to step out of our comfort. And that's what we see from Abraham. And so that is how defining moments compel us. They call us to action. Here's the 4th thing you could write down. Defining moments impact. They have this significant impact. And I think that's why God issues or creates defining moments. I mean, the first thing that defining moments do is they change our lives. I mean, if I look at the different defining moments in my life, whether it was when God called us to start the church or when I go all the way back to when I was like 19 and God really gave me the vision for this church, those moments changed me. They changed some things about me. They called me into something else. They matured me. I mean, I could go through all the different things that I experienced, because anytime, here's what I know, is that this life we have with God is a journey, just like we kind of see in Abraham's life. And you simply cannot remain the same if you choose to follow God. It is impossible to follow God and stay the same. And so as we move from moment to moment with God, we are always changing. The Bible says by the Spirit of the Lord, He's changing us into His image from glory to glory, right? And so if we're going to follow God, it's just we're committing to a life of change, right? No comfort, change. And I love that because we look at defining moments and we see how this changed Abraham. In fact, we know Abraham, when this started, was Abram. In Genesis chapter 12, he's not Abraham, he's Abram, right? But then it's later that God says, no, we're going to transform you, you're going to change your name. And He put this in his name, Abraham, which really means breath or spirit. In other words, God said, by my breath, I'm transforming you because you're following me. And so we see that in defining moments that they change us. But here's, to me, I think even more important, or at least equally important, they change us, but they impact those around us. They change us, but they impact those around us. In Genesis 12, God tells Abraham, all of the families of the earth are going to be impacted through you. I think it's an incredible statement. That when we have these defining moments with God, yeah, they're going to transform us. But God, while He is transforming us, He's also going to impact those around us. You know, I was thinking about the defining moment of September the 22nd, 2008, when I felt like God spoke to me to start this church. And I went home, and I can tell you the story. I was out walking, and God spoke, and I went home, and I told Julie, hey, I think this is what... And we had already been praying. God had already been stirring our hearts, but we needed to know that we needed that defining moment that God spoke. And I remember when God spoke, and I went home, I said, Julie, here's what God's speaking. And He spoke to me from the Word, and I know this is what we need to do. It's a defining moment. It transformed us. It changed us. It changed our direction. It revealed some things about God. All these things we're talking about, we experienced in that moment. And while that's amazing, and that was an amazing defining moment for us, it's created defining moments for literally hundreds of people. It's not really about us. It's not because we were that special. It's just because we follow God. And when we follow God through those defining moments, we're transformed. But all the people, I was thinking about over 1,700 people who've made a decision for Christ. Now, God could have used someone else, without a doubt. But because we said yes, God's grace enabled Him to use us and us to be used. And now it's created all these defining moments. And that's what I look forward right now as a defining moment for our church. But this defining moment will impact thousands, if not tens of thousands of people. Because we're going to say yes, we're going to move forward, we're going to arise. And when we arise in our defining moment, it's going to affect others. So we're going to pause right here. This is kind of the end of week number 1. And so as we go, all right, I want you, if you're watching at home with your group, I want you to discuss some things. And here's the first question that I would have you discuss, and that is, what do you encounter? What do you encounter? What do you run into when God calls you? It could be fear, it could be anxiety, it could be a different emotion, it could be any number of things. But I want you to have a discussion around us as humans. What do we encounter when God calls us? The second thing is, I want you to maybe share how your life has been impacted or how your faith has been influenced by another person when they did what God was calling them to do. So I want you to discuss those two things. And then right after that, in your workbook, you're going to have a section called Grow Together. It's another discussion that we want you to have in the life group setting. And then you're going to have a Pray Together section where you pray for each other. Make sure you do those things. Thank you so much for joining us for week 1 of Arise. Hopefully you'll be at the church this weekend as we start week number 2. But I want to say thank you for taking this journey with us and for choosing to arise into what God's called you to do. Thank you so much. I look forward to next week. Until then, remember, God has amazing things that He's calling you to if you can believe it.